Once asked me the question, why do you guys spend so much time dispelling what the establishment media says? That's a pertinent question. And of course, it's not because we want to fact check or prove someone wrong. That's not the main purpose of what we're doing. But because the media, the education system, and so on, represent an important lever of capitalist rule in society. They dispel ideas that serve to cover for the true class divisions in society and cover for the true intentions of the ruling class in carrying out their projects. Today, we'll be looking at some of the headlines from the past week, in particular, the headlines relating to Gaza and Israel and the recent shooting in the US that took place yesterday, as well as the latest events surrounding the Ukraine war and the negotiations around that. We'll also be discussing another topic, which is not in the headlines, which is about a struggle of the peoples of Gilgit-Baltistan, where the revolutionary communists have been leading the struggle and who have been faced with severe state repression in the past week. My name is Hamid Alizadeh. This is Against the Stream. And today I'm here once again with Jorge. Welcome back, Jorge. Let's start with this shooting that took place in Washington yesterday.
Yes, this is early days since it happened, so not all the facts are probably not yet known. But what we know so far is that last night in Washington, D.C., two young members of the Israeli embassy staff in Washington, D.C. were shot dead by Elias Rodriguez, who then was arrested, and he shouted, "Free Palestine." So there's clearly a political motivation behind this action. And this immediately has been used by the government in the United States and by the Israeli authorities to say that this is an anti-Semitic killing, that this is the direct result of the criticism of Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. And they're also trying to make the link. Okay, everyone who protests against this genocide is also a terrorist killer, and people want to kill Jewish people and all of that. In fact, the foreign minister of Israel, Saar, said, "This is what happens when leaders across the world surrender to the Palestinian terrorist propaganda. Stop your incitement against Israel. Stop your false accusations," he urged world leaders. And he was clearly referring to the fact that's been happening in the last few days, where Israel has renewed the ground invasion of Gaza with declared intent of removing, I don't know, perhaps 2 million people, but at least everyone in the north of the Gaza Strip. Forcibly removing them, destroying the whole place so that they can never come back. And this has obviously led to big protests everywhere. And this has forced some European governments to at least appear to criticize these actions by Israel, which are accompanied by the fact that, 60 days with no aid being
11 weeks
being allowed in, over 2 months. And the imminent threat of the death of children and so on. So obviously there's been a lot of criticism of Israel. And now the foreign affairs minister for Israel, Gideon Saar, he now says that this criticism is directly linked to the shooting, to the killings in Washington, D.C., which is completely scandalous. I mean, in fact, if you want to know the truth, the Israeli government doesn't really care about the life of Jewish people in Israel or anywhere else. They have said clearly that everyone knows that by going into Gaza again with a ground invasion, they're probably signing the death warrant of the remaining hostages. And the government of Israel, official spokespersons for the government of Israel have said that, this is fine, that they don't really care about the hostages. They just want to destroy Hamas. That's their aim. And if the hostages are killed, so be it. They do not want negotiations. They do not want a deal. So I mean, it's completely hypocritical on their part. And yes, 2 people have been killed in Washington, D.C. And we know their names, Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgrim. But just yesterday or today, dozens of people are being killed in Gaza by the Israeli government. We don't even know their names, you know. So all this moral indignation is very hypocritical in reality. And if you want to know the reason why someone like Elias Rodriguez, the shooter in Washington, D.C., carried out this action, you probably have to look for the fact that this genocide in Gaza has now been going on for 19 months, is it? Tens of thousands of people have been killed. I think the latest official figure from the Ministry of Health in Gaza is 53,000, but obviously the figure is much bigger. And people have been demonstrating, people have been protesting. There's been a wave of public opinion, mass demonstrations, encampments, and still the Western governments continue to fully back and support Israel. So some people, or in this case one person like Elias Rodriguez, probably felt completely frustrated, angry, powerless, and decided to take this action. If you want to look for the motivation for this action, that doesn't mean that we condone this action. We are communists. We're not terrorists. We think that individual terrorism is not the way forward. We need to overthrow the system as a whole, the system that leads to war, imperialism, massacres. But nevertheless, if you want to understand why a person like Elias Rodriguez took an action, carried out an action like this is probably the reason why.
Yes, I mean, it is quite hypocritical that these people pretend to care about anyone's lives, really. So all of those who say that the Zionist state is there to protect the Jews, I always say the design and you know, to honor the memory of the Holocaust and these things, I always say, well, the Zionist state is an affront to the memory of the Holocaust and all of the victims, the real victims of the Holocaust. And what they're really doing is they're holding the whole of the Israeli population hostage in reality by their constant provocations, by their constant aggressive expansionist policy, by their aggressive, you know, the reactionary operations against the Palestinians, which has been going on for almost 80 years. They have created a state of terror within the Israeli society, which they use as a means to controlling it. They don't care about any civilians dying or anything like that. It is, of course, unfortunate. I mean, I don't know who these people were. They seem to be low-level state functionaries of some sort. But they might have been right-wing or left-wing. It's actually irrelevant. The point is precisely that this situation has been whipped up by the Israelis with the full support of the West, by the way, with the full support of US imperialism, with the full support of all of the European governments.
Furthermore, they could have not carried out this genocidal campaign in Gaza without the support, the weapons, the weapon systems, the ammunition, the funding and diplomatic support by the US and Western imperialism.
Now, this is on the, it's funny because, well, not funny, but it's remarkable that this is on the front page of all of the main newspapers, and the word anti-Semitism is there, is used quite a lot. And meanwhile, what is not reported of at all, this is now being used, obviously, to whip up a mood. It's going to be used against the left. It's going to be used against the Palestine protests that are taking place. But what they don't explain is that, what about the other side of it? For example, I mean, there's just a few mentions in The Guardian today, although the whole article they had was all about the anti-Semitism aspect of it, the alleged anti-Semitism, because as far as I understand, this person's political statements were not about Jews, but about Israel and Israeli imperialism. But that's besides the point. The Guardian had a brief, very, very brief mention towards the end, almost hidden away, of rising anti-Arab crimes in the US. In October 2023, a 6-year-old Palestinian American boy in Illinois was stabbed 26 times by his landlord and killed. Clearly, and was definitely motivated by anti-Palestinian and anti-Muslim sentiment. Then, May 2024, last year, a 3-year-old American Palestinian girl was attempted drowned in Texas. Again, clearly linked to racist sentiments. Last month, there was an event in New York where a group of Orthodox Jews were attacked protesters who were protesting against an Israeli politician who visited the US. I think it was Smotrich, or Ben Gvir. Ben Gvir, sorry. There was a protest against Ben Gvir, who was visiting New York. These guys started attacking the protesters, and then a bystander, apparently a Muslim bystander, someone who lived nearby, heard about the protest, went down there to see what happened. She was attacked, she was kicked, she had things shoved in her face, she was beaten up, spat on, and they threatened to rape her while screaming "Death to Arabs." Where is this from the front pages? This has not been reported. And in fact, one of the things that they said, I can't find the I can't find the article. I must have shut it down. But one of the things that they were saying is America is with us. They felt empowered by the full backing that America, U.S. imperialism has been given to Israel and to the reactionary settlers, the far-right settlers in Israel, to the genocidal campaign against Gaza. And then there's obviously the situation in Gaza that no one talks about. Yesterday, according to official figures, 82 people died. What were they doing? What were their names? You know, now they write about these 2 people.
They didn't die. They were killed.
They were killed
by the genocidal campaign of
Israel. These 2 people, there's lots about that they were getting engaged, and there was lots of things about their personal stories. But what about these 82 people who were killed yesterday? What about the UN? One of the officials of the UN, Tom Fletcher, who is the humanitarian chief of the UN, he told BBC that 14,000 young children are at risk of dying within the next 48 hours. Instead of taking that up and talking about it as a serious problem, what the media has been doing is questioning this 14,000 figure, because in reality he misspoke. What is talked about is that 14,000 young children could be at the risk of severe malnutrition in the next year, which is the designation you give people when they're 48 hours from dying. Right? What is the difference between saying that and saying 14,000 people could die in the next 48? There's no difference. And yet that is what the press has been discussing, whether or not this was a technically apt description or not. I mean, it's mind-boggling. The way that, again, when we talk about the press, is distorting all of things. What? In order to support the interests of the ruling class, which in the West sees Israel as their main foothold, the Israeli state, by the way, not all of Israel, as their main foothold in a region that they wish to dominate.
Yeah, because in fact, if you talk about the Israelis, the population of Israel, the Jewish people who live in Israel, they are in fact against this campaign by a big majority, as revealed by all opinion polls. The majority of the people in Israel, was it 60, 70%, say that they'd rather have a deal with Hamas that liberates all hostages than the continuation of the war. And the government is the government of Netanyahu is extremely unpopular. There's been mass demonstrations against it. So if you say you want to listen to the voice of the Israeli people, that is the voice of the Israeli people. The Netanyahu and his government and the far-right settlers don't care at all about it. And the Western governments ignore
Yeah,
completely.
I was talking to my mother actually just before this, just before this show. And that's what she said. She said, "Well, it is unfortunate, but these guys don't care about Israelis getting killed. People in Israel are protesting against this war, wanting a deal to bring the hostages home, and these guys are just continuing it." So the idea that these guys are somehow the defenders of the Jews and even defenders of the Israelis is complete nonsense.
In fact, the only thing that Netanyahu is interested in defending is his own political career, and he needs to stay in
and
power.
everyone knows this.
Yes.
This is public knowledge. This is not even, and yet.
In fact, this is not something that we are saying. I mean, you read the pages of Haaretz, which is an Israeli kind of liberal Zionist newspaper. They're saying this in the editorials, in the pages, opinion articles, everywhere.
Well, this is common knowledge throughout Israel. Now, we're probably going to see an outpour of support for Israel. This is already being used in the West to prop up political support.
And to criminalize pro-Palestinian protesters and so on.
But there's another process which has been taking place, which you mentioned, which is that a series of governments in the West have been taking a colder stance towards Israel than they used to. We know, we spoke about last week, Trump went to the Middle East. He didn't visit Israel. He didn't talk with Netanyahu. In fact, he snubbed him on a whole series of issues. He started negotiations with Iran and so on. We'll get to that later. We had also in Britain, EU leaders have come out with harsh words of warning against Israel that if they don't stop this blockade, 11-week blockade of Gaza, they might take concrete measures. Perhaps. Then you had David Lammy, our own David Lammy here in Britain, in Parliament, saying that Israel's war on Gaza was morally unjustified. They have apparently also, they're reviewing some of their trade deals. They've slapped some sanction on individual settlers who have, which means nothing whatsoever. But yes, they've come out with this meek approach. What do you think that represents?
I think it represents two different questions. One is the fact that there is enormous revulsion of public opinion because of this campaign by Israel against Gaza. Fair enough, it's been going on for 20 months. There have been protests before and so on. But the way this is escalating, right? The 11-week blockade, now the beginning of a new ground invasion. The fact that now they have said openly that what they want is to make life impossible for 2 million people, so that then they choose in inverted commas to leave the Gaza Strip. So now it's even clearer than it was ever before. This is putting a lot of pressure on governments in the West, and they are forced to at least appear as caring. You know, it's becoming a bit unbearable for them from the point of view of public opinion. But I'd say there is another factor, which is that now that Trump is disassociating himself a little bit from Netanyahu and his madness of his war aims, then this is kind of a green light for the lucky European powers, particularly for Britain, to now speak up a little bit in words only. Because if you remember even a few weeks ago, when was it? A few weeks ago, there was some statement by David Lammy. He made a statement saying this is unacceptable, some actions by Israel. And then Starmer immediately corrected him and says, no, this is not what he meant. And they don't want to be offside in relation to Trump. That's the main thing. And so now they've been given the green light to maybe speak up a bit. But it's all words, as you were saying. This is just words. You know, I mean, so someone on Facebook said, I thought this was funny. Someone on Facebook said, David Lammy is so outraged at the actions of Netanyahu that the next time they send a shipment of weapons, they will include a note calling him a big mini. You know what I mean? This is the kind of action that they're taking. We will take concrete action, but there's no concrete action. The National, a paper in Scotland, published a report explaining how shipment of weapons to Israel by the UK, by Britain, have increased under the Labour government, which is pretty phenomenal because they were quite big before, but obviously now they need these weapons to carry out this genocide, and Britain's been, the Starmer government has been helpful in that respect. So then David Lammy said that this was a clickbait headline by the National. And now the National has responded by saying that on the same day that David Lammy was saying what you just said in Parliament, where he said, was it morally unjustifiable? On the same day, British RAF planes were conducting intelligence reconnaissance missions over Gaza, which they've been carrying out for 20 months now, and sharing this information with Israel. So it's not just that Britain is supplying the weapons; it's also supplying the intelligence.
They're giving them bombing targets. In other words,
that's right. And this is the headline in the National: UK spy plane flew over Gaza hours after criticism. So they're hitting back at David Lammy. Unfortunately, the National is a small newspaper in Scotland. The main newspapers are not even questioning David Lammy's story or the stories of anyone else. If the Western governments were serious about the moral outrage, instead of words, they will carry out actions. They could cut off supplies and funding for the Israeli genocidal war machine very easily. And that would make the situation very difficult for the Israeli government. Doesn't mean they will necessarily stop or anything like this. But if you compare even the so-called moral outrage in this case and in any other case, you can see that this is completely hypocritical, double standards, and it makes your blood boil. 20 months of this genocide, and it continues, and it's like it's a live stream, massive displacement, massive killing of people, which is relentless, and they are hitting hospitals, schools, the images of children, and I mean it's really enraging, and they continue as if nothing happened, with the full support of Western governments. Britain's continue to sending parts for F-35 fighters. As we said, continue to provide intelligence for targeting. I mean, it's
there is, as you said, there is a growing backlash, which is why these governments are choosing their words more wisely at the moment. In the beginning of the war, obviously, they all came out embracing Netanyahu.
David Lammy himself, he said in a famous radio interview in London LBC, he said Israel is justified in carrying out these actions. This is at the time when they started the complete blockade of water, aid, and medicines.
Yeah. But what is interesting is that this is tapping into the incredible anger that exists everywhere. We've talked about this before. There is a intense mood of an anti-establishment mood all over the world, in almost every country of the world, if not every country, in particular in the West. This is a mood that, for the most part, has not found an outlet, and a clear outlet, let's put it like that. And therefore, a lot of it is coming out through this Palestine movement. Obviously, people are outraged at Palestine, but this is a part of the ongoing crisis of the establishment, because the Palestine thing really brings out, it embodies all of everything that people see already. That behind this slick talk of democratic values and is the crudest, most barbaric interests, which shies no means in getting what it wants. Now, in Britain, there's been in London there was a protest. You were there. Were you there on Saturday?
No.
500,000 people, according to the organizers. Yeah. And what's interesting, someone was saying to me the other day that there was nothing about this. This was not in the news. This was not the organizers. I'm sure they've done some advertising, for some promotion, but nowhere was it discussed. And even afterwards, it was completely hushed up.
There was no reporting about it.
No reporting. Met Police says something like 20,000 people, which is a ridiculous amount. In The Hague, there was 100,000 people on this, which is huge for a country like the Netherlands. There's been protests in other countries.
There was a big protest in Madrid, larger than normal. And you have to take into account that this is, as I said, after 20 months of this, people have been protesting and demonstrating. In the case of Britain, in the case of London, almost every week or every other week. And now, despite all that, there's obviously an element of tiredness and a feeling that, we demonstrate and we don't achieve anything. But still, on this occasion, again, hundreds of thousands came out on the streets.
10,000 people in Dublin, 10 to 20,000 in Copenhagen, which is a lot for a small city like that. And also, in many other countries. Obviously, this is a mounting pressure in a situation where every single regime today is unstable and very, very weak. Mass anger aimed at them. But I would say there's also another aspect that's playing in what you said about Trump, and we talked about it last week. Trump has been distancing himself from Netanyahu, and now that these other guys are following suit. And he went to the Middle East. He made deals with the Saudis. He made deals with the Syrians. He is closely there's intense negotiations with Iran taking place. Everyone who except Israel, in other words. And this rapprochement with Iran in particular is a big blow to Netanyahu. Netanyahu, we've talked about this many times, for the past year or so, 2 years, he's been pushing for an all-out regional war with Iran, between Israel and Iran, in which the US would be dragged in. It's clear that Trump is not interested in that. Not because he's a peace-loving person as such, but because it's not in he's not that type. He believes in business, he believes in trade, and that's what he's focused on. He wants to focus on China, not on the Middle East.
That's right.
He wants to retract America from the Middle East to as much as he can, at least. And Netanyahu, in order for his own interest's sake, in order to stay in power, is pushing, nevertheless, down this path. But there's another thing. There was an article. Trump also made a deal with the Houthis, and I think that deal is quite significant. It tells you what situation we're facing on a world scale. There was an article in Washington Post that you sent me, which explains why Trump did a deal with the Houthis, and they say that Trump launched a campaign against the Houthis. It lasted around 30 days. Because the Houthis were blocking the waterways, the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which are the waterways towards the Suez Canal, through which a huge part of world trade goes. The Americans thought this is unsustainable. The Houthis were also attacking Israel, and they were doing all of these things in support of the Palestinians' struggle against Israel, in defense of the Gaza, in reality, the people of Gaza. The Americans, about a month and a half ago, launched a campaign aimed at, with a stated aim of uprooting and destroying the capabilities of the Houthis and forcing them to stop these attacks. Now, in the 30 days that this campaign lasted, the Houthis managed to bring down, with the air defense system, 7 Reaper MQ-9 drones, which are some of the most advanced drones that America has. They cost $36 million. There were several, according to this article, and they would paint this, they would word this very carefully and in a very mild way. Several close calls between Houthi air defense systems and F-35s, which are the most advanced jets that the Americans have. They didn't make any dent into Houthi capabilities, because at the end of those 30 days, 2 days before the end of it, the Houthis managed to actually hit Ben Gurion Airport, Israel's Ben Gurion Airport, with their missiles. A huge achievement from a military point of view. The Americans also lost an F-18 plane, which I think because of the provocations of the Houthis, missed a landing onto an aircraft carrier. The whole campaign cost $1 billion. And the Pentagon said and this would be a generous assessment probably, that they would need another 10 months of campaign just to bring down Houthi air defenses so that they can then move in. They also talked about diminishing precision missiles, which would put their stockpiles at risk, which they then could not use elsewhere. All in all, the picture that it paints is that the mightiest country in the world, military and in terms of military and economic might, taking on one of the poorest countries of the world. Yemen is desperately poor, and it's been through 10 years of civil war by the Saudis, or sorry, not civil war by the Saudis against Yemen, with the support of America and Britain, which has cost at least according to the UN, at least 350,000 lives. And yet, American imperialism could not make a dent in the capabilities of the Houthis, which are very battle-hardened people. What does that say about the American army? And what does that say if they were going to face up Iran? Israel wants a war against Iran. If they can't even take out the Houthis or make any significant dent after 1,000 bombing campaigns, 1,000 bombings in the course of 30 days, what can they do against a country like Iran, which would have much more stronger air defenses, much more capable, everything, much bigger army, and which is a much bigger country in general. Let's not talk about the fact that this whole bombing, all of these things have not been criticized by anyone, like they would criticize Russia or Iran bombing anyway, by the way. But what it shows is a picture of, in relative terms, a significantly weakened US imperialism. They cannot just do whatever they please. They cannot just wade into another country. And Trump sees that. Trump realized that this campaign is not going anywhere. And instead of doubling down and tying his reputation to it, which means that he would end up in a situation like Afghanistan or like Iraq or like Ukraine now that Biden administration did, he cut his losses.
And he declared a victory.
And then he declared victory. What's interesting is that he made a deal with the Houthis that they stay away from American ships, but they don't have to stay away from Israeli-bound ships or Israeli targets, which obviously goes against the interests of Netanyahu. But Netanyahu needs this war. He needs to continue his aggressions, because otherwise he stands, he stands.
In fact, there's been another very interesting article in the last few days. Was it 2-3 days ago? I think it was an article on CNN where they were quoting from US intelligence sources saying that Israel was preparing a strike on Iran.
Yes.
And why would US intelligence sources reveal this, which they know from spying on Israel, to the public? The only reason is in order to deactivate such an attack. Yeah. So it is clear that I don't know if Netanyahu is capable or willing to carry out an attack on his own against the will of the United States. But clearly, this leak to the media by US intelligence was a warning to Netanyahu not to carry out this, and a warning to the Iranians that the US had nothing to do with such an attack.
Yeah.
And this kind of gives you an idea of the actual current relations between these three countries: Iran, the United States, and Israel. The United States wants to reach a deal with Iran. It has to exert some pressure and some level of threat on Iran in order to have some sort of deal. But Trump will rather have a deal than go into a war, as you said, not because he's peace-loving president, but rather because he knows or he understands that a war with Iran will not be an easy thing. The result of it will not be guaranteed. And Trump came to power on the basis of putting an end to this, what do they call them? The forever wars in the Middle East. So it goes against the whole grain of his policy. And he wants to concentrate on what he considers to be, quite rightly, I will say, the main enemy or the main rival of the United States, which is China. Meanwhile, as you just explained, Netanyahu's interest is precisely to go to war with Iran and involve the United States in it in order to stay in power.
Yeah.
So these two interests are mutually contradictory.
Which would be a devastating thing, not just for the people, all of the peoples of the region, and as well as the Israeli population. So much for being the defender of Israel and of the Jews of Israel. Let's move on, because this is an ongoing story. We'll get back to this, but it's,
before we move on, there's the story about Kneecap.
Oh yeah.
Kneecap is an Irish hip-hop group, rap band, which has become quite famous in the last few months. And they've already been attacked by the media for anti-Semitism, the old accusation, which is completely false. And there's been a campaign against them. There's been some Zionist organizations whipping up this campaign. And now, as of yesterday, I think, one of the singers in this band has been charged with terror offenses for allegedly showing or waving a Hezbollah flag at one of the gigs recently, not recently, in November last year. And of course, Hezbollah is a designated terrorist organization by the UK, by Britain. And so on the basis of this, they construed a terror offense against him, which can carry a jail sentence. And there's a date for an initial hearing in June. But the interesting thing I will say about Kneecap is that instead of, like many other people have done in the past, instead of trying to apologize and make excuses and saying, no, we're not anti-Semitic and we made a mistake, or no, they said, this is a campaign of mass destruction. We are not the story. The story is the genocide that's taking place in Gaza. We are not anti-Semitic. And this is just a campaign, they said, in order to silence the critics of Israel and to criminalize protest and so on. And we will not take it. And we will fight it in court, and we will win. So I think that's really
good on Kneecap.
Very good stance, and one wishes that others had done the same in the past, like Jeremy Corbyn when he was accused of anti-Semitism, which was a completely false accusation. He then went round and created a commission of investigation. And no. I mean, when you are faced with such malicious, deliberate false allegations, which are designed in order to divert attention from the real issue, then you need to stand up. And this is actually what Fiona Lally did in
our own comrade,
Yes, when she was asked in GB News about this question of Kneecap. And she said, look, the story is not that. The story is that there is a genocide in Gaza. Tens of thousands of people are being killed. No one's been killed at any Kneecap concert by the waving of flags or by the shouting of slogans. That one thing is not related to the other. And the real crime is in Gaza. It's not in a Kneecap concert. I think that's the right stance. And that will earn them a lot of support and a lot of
What's also interesting is that no one has batted an eyelid. No ordinary people have batted an eyelid at these Kneecap things. People go to the concerts. People don't see them as terrorists. People see them as people who stand up for what's right.
The oppressed,
Exactly. Against the terrorism of the Israeli state and the terrorism supported by the Western
governments. And also
governments.
these designated terrorist organizations, this is just a farce of British imperialism in this case. Al-Jolani, the new president of Syria,
who's an actual terrorist,
who came to power through an armed uprising, an armed campaign against the existing government. He is a terrorist, and he was a designated terrorist until 5 minutes ago, and now he goes around shaking hands with EU diplomats, and I mean, it's complete farce. Hezbollah is a political party in Lebanon, which is part of the government or was part of the government up until very recently. It has, I don't know what, 25% of the votes in Lebanon. It's also a national resistance organization against the invasion by Israel. And yeah, if Britain considers them a terrorist organization, so be it. I mean, that's just British imperialism being British imperialist, isn't it?
Exactly. The true terrorists terrorizing the whole world. Yes, but you have on the one side, you have the people who actually stand with Kneecap. And then you have the media completely detached.
Hysterical
just
campaign.
falling over each other to denounce this thing. I mean, and the world that they live in is completely parallel. They live in this bubble and they actually believe each other, themselves and their own propaganda. But obviously that is that's just fueling the process of class struggle from beneath, which is the main thing here. Because people see this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, for the majority of people, it was far more difficult to see. But the layer of people who can see the mismatch between the reality that they're living and then the reality that the media and the establishment are presenting them with is growing. And all of this will feed into that and at a certain point reveal itself in revolutionary convulsions.
The mass capitalist media, TV and newspapers are completely discredited. Quite rightly so, because they've been caught lying. People can
again
now,
and again and again.
as you say, people can now see the disconnect between reality, as they can see it, because now there's other means of getting information. You can get on WhatsApp groups, on social media, you can get direct news of what is really happening in Gaza. And this is not reported in the mass media, or the opposite is reported in the mass media. So people, most young people today, they do not get the news from the main capitalist media outlets, but rather from other means. So.
Speaking of reporting the exact opposite, let's move on to the next topic, which is Ukraine. In relation to Ukraine, the thing that's been, I mean, it's mind-boggling, I have to say. It is very surreal. The main front page headlines surrounding Ukraine has been, Putin did not show up for negotiations. Putin was afraid of negotiations. Putin doesn't want peace. That's been the past 10 days, the main thing. Now, we've had a phone conversation between Putin and Trump on Monday, which we'll get to. But I think we need to kind of unpack this. Putin does not want peace. Putin does not want to show up for negotiations. That was related to Russian and Ukrainian negotiations, which ended up taking place in Turkey last Thursday. Now, I just think we should go through the facts, just the events the sequence of events that took place. What happened was, on the 5th of May, the leaders of, Merz from Germany, Macron from France, Starmer, and Donald Tusk from Poland, they went to Kiev to meet with Zelensky. They had a meeting amongst themselves and they issued an ultimatum to Trump. Oh, by the way,
they had a phone call.
They
put him on speakerphone.
Macron called Trump from his mobile phone. They put Trump on speakerphone, and together they pushed Trump into sort of accepting an ultimatum to be put to Putin
for a 30-day ceasefire.
Russia must agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire starting from the 12th of May or face very tough EU and US sanctions. And I'm not sure what Trump said there, but they came out saying, oh yeah, Trump agreed with us. But I don't think that's what Trump said afterwards. He never accepted that he agreed with this. The day after, Putin says, why should we have a ceasefire?
This was, by the way, the couple of days after that Putin had offered a ceasefire, a Victory Day, 3-day ceasefire. Yeah. And before that, there had been another offer of a ceasefire for Easter and so on, which Zelensky never said anything about.
No, he did say he rejected them. He rejected them. He said, no, nothing. He says Putin is not offering us any ceasefires. Putin keeps offering ceasefires. Obviously, that suit Russian objectives as well, but they are nevertheless ceasefires. Zelensky then rejects them and says, no, what we need is a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. He gets all of the Europeans on board, and they issue this ultimatum. Then on the 6th of May, Putin says, why should we have an unconditional ceasefire? We are winning the war. Ukrainians are tired. The army is buckling in different places, is creaking everywhere. Ukrainian society is at its limits. A 30-day ceasefire would only mean you get the time to rest, regroup, rearm, all of these things. Why should we do this? Unless we have specific measures in place to stop you from doing that, we can't have a 30-day ceasefire. That's been what Putin has been saying. So he says, well, we can have a ceasefire after let's start peace negotiations, and then they might lead to a ceasefire. The Europeans,
in fact, he then named the day. He said on Thursday in Turkey.
No, well, yes, because he then says we will be in Turkey on the 12th of May, the same day that you said we should start a ceasefire. We will be in Turkey. You can come, and we will open for negotiations. This is a concession because so far the Russians have said we don't accept the legitimacy of the Ukrainian presidency because
it's expired.
It's expired in 2000. What was it?
Last year,
2024. Yes. Nevertheless, they say we're going to be in Istanbul. You can come and negotiate with us. Trump then immediately jumps on, says Zelensky has to agree with this. This is great news. We need to really get so Trump
with no mention of the ceasefire or
exactly.
sanctions.
So Trump is off the so-called ironclad deal. This is all happening in a day and a half. 2 days, sorry. Zelensky is then put in a place where he's been calling for a ceasefire. He's been saying Putin doesn't want peace. The whole narrative is Putin does not want peace, and Putin says, let's come and negotiate. Let's come and negotiate peace. If you really want to negotiate peace, let's come. Zelensky is then put in a place where he doesn't know what to do. He says, okay, I'll agree, but Putin has to be there. Putin has to be in Istanbul. And I think actually Trump even says, I might go to Istanbul myself. So what he's trying to say is that, Putin is not going to come, and therefore he doesn't want peace. That's where the whole story comes from. But it doesn't talk about all of the background of what this is. Obviously, why should Putin go to Istanbul? There's no purpose in going there. What the Russians have been saying is that any peace negotiation must have serious technical aspects. And we need to continue this. And therefore, they sent to Istanbul a team of not like top-ranked people, not ministerial level, but quite high-level people who were, many of whom...
In fact, these are the same people who were there in, was it April 2022, at the beginning of the war, when there were peace negotiations in Turkey.
Who actually, and this is an upgraded team actually, because they have several high-ranking military officials there, which means that these people already negotiated a peace agreement in 2022. Putin is saying the agreement now must be a continuation of that agreement. We're sending the same people plus some people who are upgraded.
A deal, by the way, this needs to be said, a deal, by the way, which was scuppered by Boris Johnson, who flew quickly to Kiev and convinced Zelensky not to sign that deal that they had already more or less arrived at some draft. And he said, and the Western powers put pressure on Zelensky not to sign that deal. And they said, whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, you're going to win this war with our help. And now we find ourselves nearly 3 years later, 3 years to the day later. The situation in Ukraine is much worse. Tens of thousands, or I don't know, more people have died in the meantime. And Ukraine is going to be forced to accept worse terms than they were already signing or agreeing to 3 years ago.
And all of this is obviously making it even worse because, as we get to, Russia is winning on the battlefield. But let's just continue the sequence of events because it gets so surreal, the whole thing. Zelensky then goes to Zelensky. We should mention Zelensky has introduced a law in Ukraine stating that Ukraine is not allowed to have peace negotiations with Putin.
And no one can talk to Putin.
Right? Yeah. Then a few months ago, he changed this. He says, I am the only one who can have, this is nowhere in the law, by the way, but he's saying, I am the only one who can have negotiations with Putin. Mm-hmm. And so on the basis of this, he then goes to Turkey, but he doesn't go to Istanbul. He goes to Ankara, which is the capital. And instead of having negotiations with the Russian delegation, which is there, he has a 3-hour conversation with Erdogan, who I'm sure is telling him, look, mate, there's no way around this. You have to go and negotiate. So finally, he accepts to send Umerov. I think he's the defense minister. No, minister of foreign, minister of defense. I can't. Anyway, prominent minister. He sends him to Istanbul after 3 hours of saying he's not getting anywhere. And there is the beginnings of negotiations, which come out with what? With no ceasefire, but a prisoner exchange of 1,000 prisoners from each side, and agreement to have further negotiations about a possible ceasefire. What happens to the ultimatum? The ultimatum was for the 12th of May. That if the Russians don't agree to the terms of an unconditional ceasefire, there's going to be sanctions. No serious sanctions have been put. I think Britain has slapped Russia with a few sanctions.
There is a European package, as they call it, 17th package of sanctions. But sanctions before have not had a serious impact on the Russian economy. And sanctions that are not backed by the United States, as is the case now, will not have a big... It will actually hurt the European economy even further than so far.
But the point is, in all of this, look, the situation is this. Whatever you want or don't want, the war in Ukraine has been won by Russia, or is being won every single day. The Ukrainian army is overwhelmed, is understaffed, is under-equipped. The economy, the GDP is collapsing. Inflation is really picking up. Mass demoralization, hundreds of thousands of disabled and killed. This is a desperate
people
situation.
Resisting mobilization.
People resisting. You actually, we should maybe post this. Bring a lot. There's so many videos of brave women all over Ukraine attacking mobilization buses and mobilization vehicles who are trying to kidnap young men off the streets. And the Europeans corruption scandals one after another, and the Europeans and the Ukrainians do not want peace. The reason is clear, because Donald Trump has made it clear that Ukraine is not a priority for him. The withdrawal of America from Ukraine would mean a significant military downgrading of American presence in Europe, which would put the Europeans in a difficult position. It would mean a significant strengthening of Russia, militarily, diplomatically, and then following that also economically and politically in the whole of Eastern Europe. The Europeans, they don't want peace. They're the ones who started this war, by the way, America, along with America. They started this war. They provoked this war. Why? In order to defeat Russia, to weaken Russia, and to subjugate it. It was an imperialist project, but they lost, and they don't want to accept this. And what they want is to further the devastation. They want to pull in America even deeper into this conflict, just like Netanyahu wants to pull America into the Middle East.
But this is what Trump said when Trump and then Trump had this phone conversation with Putin on Monday, and it was over 2 hours conversation or something like this.
Very warm,
more than 2 hours, very warm conversation. And anyway, the conclusion of this conversation from Trump's readout was there's been a very good conversation. And basically he said, well, now Russia and Ukraine need to talk about the peace negotiations. And we, the United States, are going to talk with Russia about trade deals, right? This is what he wants. He wants to lift sanctions on Russia in exchange for trade deals so that U.S. companies can have can do business with Russia again. They can maybe get their hands on minerals and so on. And basically try to pull Russia away from China.
Yeah.
Whether he is going to achieve that or not is a different matter. But that's his aim. And he's now said it clearly. And then on top of this, then Marco Rubio said, well, look, I mean, there's many things happening in the world. Ukraine is important, but we need to think whether we're going to continue using our efforts, our diplomatic time in trying to solve this conflict, or they need to sort it out themselves. And if there's no peace deal, we're going to walk away from this and concentrate on other things that are more important. Yeah. This is unheard of on the part of the US imperialism. And certainly all the reports in the bourgeois media, in the Financial Times, in the Wall Street Journal, in Bloomberg, is that when Trump called the European leaders after his phone conversation with Putin, they were all shocked. They were all in a state of shock at what they heard. Because last time they spoke to Trump on the speakerphone from Macron, they thought that they had agreed with Trump that if Putin wasn't signing a ceasefire, then there will be sanctions from the United States. Yeah. And now Trump said precisely the opposite, which was his intention all along. Yeah. And there was a very interesting line in one of these reports, I think it was in the Financial Times, that said European officials are now in a state of shock over the United States' intention of withdrawing from Europe. But I don't know why they are in a state of shock, because they were already told this back at the Munich Security Conference, whenever that was. Was it in February or something like this? January, February. This has been the intention of the United States all along. They are not interested in Europe. Or rather, they are interested in Europe, but Europe is not the main theater of operations. The main enemy, the main rival on the world scene is China. They can't be fighting 3 wars at the same time. They want to disentangle themselves. U.S. imperialism, or in this case, the Trump administration, they want to disentangle themselves from the war in Ukraine and from any wars in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, they're shocked. It's funny because there's a lot of talk about Trump's erratic ways of behaving and his madness. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's a screw loose somewhere in Trump's head. But what is really mad is these guys. Mm-hmm. They live in a fantasy. They literally live in a fantasy world. Mm. They puff themselves up as these great big statesmen, and they don't understand anything about war, about diplomacy, about the economy. Yeah. They live in this fantasy world. They've gotten used. This is European Western ruling class arrogance. It's gotten them to the head. They think they can do anything, and in the end, nothing will happen to them. Mm-hmm. But here is a situation where they've lost this war. Mm-hmm. And now Trump has come along. He's acknowledging this fact. We've lost it. This example that we said before with the Houthis. If America cannot defeat the Houthis, how can they defeat Russia in a military conflict? It can't happen. And in fact, what is really coming out of it is that a lot of the Western gear, which is very advanced, is not necessarily well suited for modern warfare.
For this type of war,
and they're actually coming to short, head to head. So, who is it that doesn't want peace? It's the Europeans. Mm-hmm. And what is the cost that's being paid? It's Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Ukraine is being devastated. Now, just to wrap up this segment, there's been a big scandal in the Ukraine the past 10 days. On the May 16th, the commander of the 47th Mechanized Brigade, which is the most prominent military brigade in Ukraine, is the one that's being sent to all the flashpoints, all of the politically and militarily most important points. You see them just being. A year ago, they were fighting near Avdiivka. They were trying to halt the rapid advances of the Russians. Then they were sent to Oskil River, where the Russians were advancing there. Then they were sent to Kursk. And the commander of the battalion, which is called Alexander Shirshin. His call sign is Genius. He's a very prominent commander. He's extremely well liked by his troops, by his officers. And he publicly resigned from the army. And he wrote a Facebook post which says, "I've never received dumber orders than the ones in our current sector." He's been posted in the Kursk and Sumy regions. He says, "Someday I'll tell the details, but this idiotic loss of people and trembling before incompetent generals leads to nothing but failures. All they're capable of is reprimands, investigations, and disciplinary actions." Now, this is related to the fact that this Kursk incursion that we talked about it a lot here, had no strategic aim whatsoever.
It was purely a political media stunt.
It was just a media stunt. And what he explains actually is that, well, what lots of other people explain, he doesn't say this because he's still bound by military discipline. And in fact, he writes, I can't wait to retire so I can talk with some journalist friends. But what happened is that they kept this area at any cost, and it had a great cost. Thousands of people died. We don't know the exact figures, but lots of people were killed. And they kept holding it because of the PR value of it. The same thing they did last year as the Russians were advancing on Pokrovsk.
Sorry, the PR value, which was what? Which was to show that Ukraine was not losing the war, the contrary to the reality, that they were capable of invading Russia, and all for what? In order to keep the United States interested in this war and supplying weapons, when the reality on the ground is the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah. This has been the story of this whole war. From a point of view of Ukraine and Zelensky, it's been constant PR stunt, which has caused hundreds of thousands of lives in order to get the flow of money and arms going to Ukraine. And there's a whole industry, by the way, in Ukraine that's built around this. This is also a money-making machine. This is not just a military and political affair. This is a money-making machine.
There was another report.
In the Financial Times.
Financial Times report, a very long investigation, which went into massive corruption in weapons procurement for Ukraine. And they said this massive corruption takes place at all levels. One, ghost companies being created in the United States and other European countries, which promise to deliver, get the money, they never deliver anything. But then also corruption on the Ukrainian side of things, where money is going all over the place. Weapons never arrive where they're supposed to arrive, and they are paid over the odds and so on. Because you say there's been one big scandal in Ukraine this month, but there's been another one. There's been another one where Ukrainska Pravda, which is a pro-Kiev, pro-government, nationalist, Ukrainian nationalist newspapers, no pro-Russian source by any stretch of imagination, but they published a long report about corruption in the 155th Mechanized Brigade, which is this famous brigade.
It's a French
NATO-trained brigade that we already talked about last year. They were involved in another scandal where, was it 1,700 of its soldiers?
Of its 5,000 soldiers.
No, less than that. It was 3,500. Well, I don't know. Anyway, 1,700 soldiers were found to have deserted as soon as they were sent to the front in a NATO-trained brigade. Some of them had deserted already in France during training. Anyway, this was another PR project by Zelensky and Macron in this case. Anyway, so now there's been another scandal in this brigade where they uncovered corruption, where high-ranking officers from the brigade will go to certain units and told them, well, if you pretend you are in the front line for X number of days during this month, you can get the bonus for being in the front, which was 100,000 hryvnia. But this bonus, instead of keeping it for yourselves, will be one bit for yourselves, one bit for ourselves, one bit for the unit. And so basically it's corruption, lying about where they were, and in order to get money from the high command. So this has been now uncovered. But at the same time, in the reporting of this story, there was another bit where they said that since the beginning of 2025, 1,200 soldiers from this brigade have also deserted, have gone AWOL, which is incredible. This means that in total,
there's nothing left.
2,900, no, because they keep sending more people, but 2,900 people from this one brigade have deserted since the month of October. And this gives you an idea of the massive amount of corruption, the fact that this corruption is now being reported publicly, and the general state of demoralization in Ukraine, where people can understand that this war cannot be won, particularly that this war can never be won without the support of the United States. The United States withdraw, then there's going to be the collapse, an open collapse. And now this brings me back to the point you were making at the beginning. Has any of this been reported in the Western media? I mean, because we say, okay, this article we read in the FT, this article we read in Ukrainska Pravda, but has this been in the front page of The Guardian, or I don't know?
It's covered in the back pages.
Has it been in the main news on the BBC or France 1? Or no, it's not been. And so, for Western public opinion, the general idea that's transmitted is Putin is not interested in peace. He's a warmonger. Zelensky is interested in peace. The Europeans want peace, and Ukraine is winning the war. So I wonder what will happen when finally the news cannot be hidden anymore and the truth is revealed. This will compound on people's anger, distrust of the mass media, and all the while we are told in Western Europe that defense spending, arms spending must go up to what is it now, 5% of GDP. And meanwhile, pensions are cut, winter fuel allowance is cut, social spending is cut, healthcare and education is cut in order to maintain the fiction of a war which cannot be won, the militarism and the imperialist ambitions of European second-rate powers, which can't stand on their own in the world scene. I think that this is already creating radicalization, but once this is fully uncovered, this can have revolutionary consequences.
Yeah, I mean,
in consciousness.
Now they're ramping up this militarism, and again, our own Fiona Lally was on GB News, and she was asked, "Don't you want to?" Because there was a question of drafts, people being drafted into the army and conscription, and people said, they asked her, "Don't you want to defend? Don't you want to defend Britain?" And the question that stands out to me is, who is the real threat to Britain? Who is the real threat to anyone? It was the Western powers that provoked the war in Ukraine. It's clear. I mean, there's so many sources and so much evidence of this. They're the ones who keep protracting it. They're the ones who keep provoking Russia. If you believe that Russia is a serious military threat, then why do you keep poking your fingers into its eyes? This is the world's biggest nuclear power. And not only that, not only are you poking its eyes now, but also signaling that you want to increase military tensions with Russia. Why is Europe rearming? It's in order to protect their own their imperialism, their imperialist ambitions, which are now under threat because Trump wants to pull out of Europe. That's what this is really about. It's not about European defensive capabilities being undermined. It's European offensive capabilities which are being undermined. I just noted that in Lithuania, I think, as in Estonia, I mix them up now. They are basically disenfranchising Russian speakers. There is a campaign. Estonia, sorry. There's a campaign against so-called Russian influence in the whole of Eastern Europe. That's what they really want. They want to maintain their grip, the political and economic grip around Eastern Europe and around the areas which they're traditionally seen as, or recently have seen as their backyard, and want to keep Russia out of it and keep it. so they can continue their exploitation of these areas and further and other things. So, who is the real threat to the security, safety, and security of Europe? It's the ruling classes, obviously, who keep provoking.
So, if you ask me, you want to defend Britain? I'd say, yeah, I want to defend the education system. I want to defend the NHS. I want to defend the right of people to have a job and a roof over their heads. And this is being threatened not by Russia, but by this government, Labour, so-called Labour government of Starmer, by the previous government, 15 years of austerity policies, and in general by the parasitical ruling class of Britain, whose number of billionaires is going up. The amount of wealth that they are amassing is increasing. This is the real danger to Britain, to working people in this country.
It's the real enemy within.
Yes,
the ruling class. Okay, let's move on to our last segment, which is about Pakistan. On the 14th of May, we've covered this on the website, by the way. There will be links in the description to the articles regarding this. On the 14th of May, a series of activists in Pakistan were arrested in the Gilgit-Baltistan region of Pakistan, which is not really Pakistan, but I'll get to that in a minute. They were arrested. The names are Ihsan Ali, Wahid Hassan, Mahbub Wali, Asghar Shah, Masood Rahman, and other leaders who are members of the Awami Action Committee, which is an activist committee that's been fighting for the rights of the people of Gilgit-Baltistan in the past few years. These were also, they weren't just popular leaders, but they were also communists. At least Ihsan Ali was, and several of the others of the arrested were also members of the Revolutionary Communist Party of Pakistan, which is our organization, the section of the Revolutionary Communists International in Pakistan. And they were arrested because they were mobilizing against a mineral bill that's being passed in the Pakistani parliament, which will devastate the region. Now, let's go just to back up a little bit. There's the history of this region is quite complicated. Gilgit-Baltistan is a multi-ethnic region, which is in the northeastern corner of Pakistan, leading up towards India and China. There's Chinese peoples, and there are people who have a Chinese language roots, and there are people who have Aryan language roots. There's Shias, there's Sunnis. There's all sorts of a myriad of different peoples who've lived there for thousands of years, more or less peacefully together. But this region first of all, is one of the most beautiful areas of the world. I believe 5 out of 12 plus 8,000 peaks, mountain peaks of the world are in this area. The Himalayas, K2, the second highest, tallest mountain in the world is there. And but this region was a part of the Kashmiri Principality before the partition of India and Pakistan. But once partition happened, Kashmir became a contested area between Pakistan and India. Pakistan took over and invaded this part, but the area has never been officially included in Pakistan. Why? Because the Pakistanis do not want to formalize their control over this area, because that would put an formal end to the
claim to the whole of Kashmir.
The whole of Kashmir. So this is a region which has stayed in a political no man's land. It's not covered by any real constitutional laws. It has an assembly. Officially, it has an assembly. But this assembly doesn't really have any constitutional basis. is arbitrary law there. In reality, it's the Pakistani army which controls everything, is a huge tourist attraction. It's one of the most remote areas of the planet, by the way. Very, very mountainous, very rugged terrain, very difficult to build in. But the Pakistani army controls it. And it has also been very much something that's been in the interest of the Chinese to have. They've developed a lot of the areas. They have a lot of interest in there. And recently, this scramble for rare earth minerals has heightened the importance of this region for China and America. And there are Chinese and American companies who want to get in there and mine and develop the area for different reasons. And therefore, they are now passing this mineral bill.
It's called a land reform bill because, in fact, it's about the property of the land.
Yes.
This is a formerly tribal area where people don't have title deeds to the land, but they have occupied this land and used this land for agriculture and pastoralism for many decades, for centuries. Now the law, this so-called land reform, which is not a land reform law at all, what it will do is that it will give the Pakistani state ownership over this land, and therefore they'll be able to sell it off or sell off the mineral rights, and that's why people are against. And in fact, the Awami Action Committee, the People's Action Committee, which has been fighting for the price of flour, electricity cut-offs, and a whole number of other things over the last 2 or 3 years, was calling a grand jirga, a grand national assembly on the 24th and 25th of May to prepare a plan of mass mobilization against the passing of this so-called land reform bill. And this is one of the reasons why they were arrested on the 14th of May. All the leading people in this committee.
Yes. This is something which is really is hated, this bill, because it's a threat to the livelihood of the whole of most people in the region. It's, as you say, it's a massive land grab.
Yes,
that's what it is. It's a massive land grab, and it is there's mass anger against this. The Awami Action Committee, yes, has been leading mass movements for a number of years now. And they actually managed to win a series of victories on the price of electricity, price of flour, which was significantly reduced by about 80 or 90%. Which is obviously, electricity and flour is a huge cost for the very, very, very poor people of this region. But there's also, as I said, there's the national question also comes into play, because a lot of the peoples of this region are saying, well, Pakistan should formalize their control of this region because that will give us rights, that will give us legal rights, political and civil rights, which is not much in Pakistan, but it tells you about how little they have in Gilgit-Baltistan. The Pakistanis don't want to do this because that would endanger their interests in Indian-occupied Kashmir. And therefore, this is now, there's a big build-up. We should also say that this whole thing also coincides with the conflict between India and Pakistan, the recent conflict we had.
Recent war.
The recent war we had, the recent bombings and attacks that India and Pakistan carried out against each other, because the nationalist hysteria which has been whipped up inside of Pakistan has been one of the things that's been used against not just the people of Gilgit-Baltistan, but against people everywhere. This is the role of reactionary nationalism, that they whip up this mood of nationalist fervor to mobilize a reactionary base, which they then use to crack down on any sort of opposition. So for all of those,
for this very unpopular regime in Pakistan and the very unpopular regime in India to stay in power.
Exactly. What is the main claim of the Pakistani regime is that we are the defenders of the Muslims of this country, right? But who are the ones who are suffering? It's the Muslims of that particular country. Precisely. It's not India that's oppressing the people in Pakistan. It's the Pakistani ruling class, and they're using this nationalism to do it, just like the Israelis, by the way, are doing in Israel against the Jews. These guys are doing it against the Pakistani Muslims, and this shows the true nature of this type of reactionary nationalism.
Mm-hmm. And this comes after mass movements of other nationalities inside Pakistan. The Pashtuns that were on the march with mass movement a few years ago, then the Baluch people, and now it's in the Gilgit-Baltistan. And in these national movements, two things are connected: the national democratic and civil rights aspirations with the immediate social and economic demands for land, electricity, bread, housing, and education, and all of the rest.
Yeah, I mean, it brings out this nationalism is a very broad concept, but it has two sides of it. There's the nationalism of the poor and of the oppressed, which is the sort of nationalism you see in Kashmir, you see it in Gilgit-Baltistan, in many areas, which is about the question of bread. That is what it fundamentally is, which puts those movements on the side of the working class, because the question of bread is precisely the question that can only be solved by the working class movement. And then you have the nationalism of the rich, of the ruling classes, which is about what? Which is a means to cover class contradictions, to dilute them in the eyes of the masses, and to rally a section of the poor and oppressed behind the regime in saying, look, we are your supporters. Your enemies are on the other side. It's the people, it's the Indians or it's the Arabs or whatever it is. We are your protectors. You should come and align with us. Whereas in reality, their interests are diametrically opposed.
Correct.
That was all I had to say. Do you have any final remarks on today's episode?
No, I mean, maybe the one thread that unites all these different stories is the question of the role of the mass capitalist media in telling us the opposite of the truth, in hiding what is really happening. But I think that only has a limited effect. Because it comes a point when people start to see through this fog of lies, and they can start to see the real interests behind this. And whether it is in Britain or in Pakistan or in India or in Israel or in Palestine, we have to say that we need to uncover the real class interests of the ruling class in order to organize, in order to fight, to put an end to this rotten system.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say you can fool the people with a lie, but you can't feed the people with a lie, which is why the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface sooner or later. And as you say, this will have a revolutionary effect. I think we should end it here. It's been a great talking with you. For the rest of you, we'll be back again Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time next week. And again, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, write down your comments, your questions. We do read them all, and we do take them into consideration and try to answer them during the course of the shows. And most importantly, send this material to people who you think might be interested. My name is Hamid Alizadeh. I was here with Jorge Martin, and this is Against the Stream.